over the big screen and in the news these days. We have new revelations about hack attacks from China, a renewed debate over drones, and the still running controversy over torture, which bubbled up again with Zero Dark 30's 5 Oscar nominations. So I wanted to get to the bottom of some of these crucial issues of national security with a panel of people who come at it from different angles. Michael Hayden was the director of the CIA and the NSA. He is a principal with the Chertoff Group, a global security advisory firm. Reuel Marc Gerecht was a Middle East specialist in the CIA's Directorate of Operations. He is now a senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Richard Haass is a former top national security official under both Presidents Bush. He is now president of the Council on Foreign Relations and the author of a forthcoming book, Foreign Policy Begins at Home. And Jane Harman retired from Congress in 2011 after 9 terms. She has been a leading legislator on national security issues throughout her career. She now runs the Woodrow Wilson Center in Washington. All right, with that stack of resumes, I hope to God we have an interesting conversation.
We'll go to a break now.
Let's talk about drones, Richard, because you took a fairly strong stance for a Republican a national security official. You think we've gone too far with drone strikes?
I do. I think we want to make them possible. They do some good. On the other hand, we've got to realize that they're one tool in the arsenal. We don't want to alienate governments, and we don't want to alienate populations. The whole idea is to gain progress in the war against terrorists and terrorism. I think essentially we've probably shot them off a little bit too frequently. We haven't limited them quite enough to high-value targets, high chance of success, a little bit too much willingness to use them when we think there's a chance the terrorists might be involved in a certain activity. So I don't want to stop them free. Don't get me wrong. On the other hand, we don't want to go to the other extreme and make it casual or something of an everyday affair.
Jane, you have a suggestion. You say, well, let's get some kind of institutionalized legal process, drone courts, you call them.
Well, it's beyond drone courts. I have lived the entire FISA cycle, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, and it worked very well for 23 years. It established the intelligence committees on the Hill and a specialized court to review efforts to read the communications or hear them between people. I think that framework could fit drone strikes. I agree with Richard. They should be very occasional, but they're necessary. And when they're necessary, not only Americans, but foreigners should be assured that America abides by the rule of law.
Mike, you faced these issues front and center. What Jane is describing is, I think, a significantly reduced use of drone strikes. Could you live with that? Were you running the CIA?
Yeah, Fareed, keep in mind that circumstances change, and as Richard pointed out, what may have been necessary and very appropriate for a battlefield 4, 5, or 6 years ago may not be the same today. Look, we're a bit safer than we have been in the past. We have had great success, in some measure due to drone strikes. Once again, I wouldn't take them totally off the table. We need to be able to defend ourselves with all the tools available. With regard to the drone courts, I'm personally not comfortable with that. Putting a judicial body between the president and any of his operating forces. But we need to develop a mechanism that most of America feels comfortable about what we're doing. I don't think it's a court, but some sort of review, a commission named by the President and Congress that doesn't get in the chain of command, but reviews drone operations and reports to both of the political branches with very prominent and trustworthy Americans and trusted Americans on such a commission may give the kind of political sustainability that programs like this need over the long term if they're going to continue.
I worry about some kind of a commission. I don't know what training they would have, and the record on commissions is fairly bleak. Let's just start with Bowles-Simpson.
Reuel, one of the collateral issues with drone strikes, one that actually Mike didn't mention as prominently, is the issue of civilian damage, collateral damage to people who may not be al-Qaeda. One of the things Donald Rumsfeld used to say about the war on terror, the question is not how many people we're killing, but are we changing the dynamics so they're not producing more of them as we keep killing them? And presumably that's one of the things one has to take into account. That is, if you radicalize an entire village by a drone attack, maybe you got one guy, but was it worth it? Is that a calculus worth thinking about?
It's possible. I mean, I think with some drone strikes, if an individual's worth a missile, perhaps he's worth risking American lives and trying to capture and interrogate.
And that's one of the things that actually Stan McChrystal has been saying, that we're using drones because we're trying not to push American forces out there. But maybe the implication is sometimes we may want to take that risk.
Yeah, I agree. I think drones are easy. They're an easy way of escaping very hard questions, and I think it behooves us to review it. I'm not terribly in favor of any type of judicial review. There are two war-making bodies in the U.S. government, Congress and the President, and I think the type of review is quite, if the Senate and the House Committees on Intelligence want to review what the President is doing, they certainly have the authority to do so, and they can get in that debate.
Let me just quickly move to another issue before we take a break, because I want to get it in. The China hacking story, this is pretty serious, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. It raises real fundamental questions about China's commitment to the rule of law internationally. It's a form of espionage. It's a form of economic warfare. It could be also in some ways targeting potentially vulnerabilities in American society. So should the United States and China ever have a crisis, China could either threaten to do certain things or actually do certain things, say against the American electricity grid or against the American financial system. And these people aren't freelancing. You know China as well as anybody. These people are clearly operating with the tolerance of the Communist Party in China, under the authority of the People's Liberation Army. This is serious, and I think the Chinese are underestimating the impact this is having about the nature of the relationship. This sends a message to Americans across the board that this relationship is not what it should be if China is treating us in this way, essentially going after our information and going after potential vulnerabilities in our system, stealing our intellectual property. This is not how you act if you want to talk about words like partnership.
Mike, the Chinese will say in response, or some Chinese will say, look, you guys do it too. Why are you getting so head up? You ran the CIA and the NSA. What would be your response to them?
Right. I'd freely admit that all nations spy, all nations conduct espionage, but some nations like ours, self-limit. We steal other nations' secrets to keep Americans safe and free. We don't do it to make Americans rich or to make American industry profitable. And what the Chinese are doing is industrial espionage, trade secrets, negotiating positions, stealing that kind of information on an unprecedented scale for Chinese economic advantage. And that's why I think our response should be in the economic zone. We need to make Chinese cyber behavior part of the overall portfolio of Sino-American relations, and we need to begin to exact a price on the Chinese in the economic sphere for what it is they're doing to us.
When we come back, we're going to talk to this panel about torture. Does it work? Did it get Osama bin Laden? I think there's some people here who know the answers when we come back.
You guys met in Iran back in the 90s. I don't know!
It's Oscar time, and Best Picture nominee Zero Dark 30 has brought the topic of waterboarding once again to the fore. Some argue that the movie makes the case that waterboarding and other enhanced interrogation techniques were instrumental in finding Osama bin Laden. Some senators and the CIA disagree. Let's open it up to the panel. Michael Hayden, Reuel Marc Gerecht, Richard Haas, and Jane Harman. Michael Hayden, you more than anyone else could probably tell us. Did enhanced interrogation techniques, specifically waterboarding, get us the vital information on the path to Osama bin Laden?
Well, Fareed, we waterboarded only 3 people. Now, there were several detainees in CIA custody against whom enhanced interrogation techniques were used, not including waterboarding, that did provide information that formed part of the fabric, part of the tapestry of information that we used to finally get to Abbottabad. If you look at the movie, it was artistically true, not factually true. Artistically, it portrayed the CIA interrogation program, but factually, it was overwrought and inaccurate. Artistically, it seemed to draw tight connections between the interrogation program and Abbottabad. There were connections, but they weren't that tight. And then finally, artistically, it had Maya against the world and against a large fraction of the rest of the agency, which really wasn't true. This was a team effort over a long period of time. But even Director Panetta has pointed out that some of the information that formed part of that fabric in the hunt for bin Laden came from detainees against whom enhanced interrogation techniques have been used.
Reuel, you were in the CIA Director of Operations. Do you think, from watching the movie, that that the portrayal, the connection between waterboarding and Osama bin Laden is real?
I suspect that it did have something to do with the success. I mean, we all want there not to be a contradiction between our ethics and counterterrorism. We want to do well by doing good. The only one problem with the history of counterterrorism, the history of espionage suggests that pain is a very effective tool in interrogation if used well. And the debate really ought to be, what is the type of pain that a liberal democracy wants to use to stop individuals from taking down skyscrapers?
Well, there's issues about that. Can we have confidence in information that's obtained this way? And I think there's lots of people have looked at it and have raised fundamental questions about how much confidence can you have about information you extract from someone who's had to undergo these kinds of techniques. On occasion it's good, on occasion it's not. Obviously it's hard to tell.
Fundamentally, there's no difference in an interrogation where you serve as a father confessor and you use pain. The verification of the information has nothing to do with what the individual says to you when he's under duress or not under duress.
You're always, the information is always suspect and always has to be corroborated.
The objective is to get the individual talking.
Sure, but the information I've seen, and I'm not a trained interrogator, is that if you can build trust with the suspect, you have the best chance of getting accurate information. You have to verify. You have to trust but verify. But that's how, by the way, we are getting information in advance on some of the intentions of these lone wolves in our country. I mean, these are people with clean records, and if their families and their communities don't trust our law enforcement and come forward and tell us what they're thinking about, we're likely not to find them. So this technique of building trust, I think, is the one we should be using, and it also portrays our values. And the goal in the end is not to play whack-a-mole here. It is to win the argument with the next generation that's trying to decide whether to strap on suicide vests or join civilized society.
Mike, how do you address that issue? Because it is true that the CIA is seen in many parts of this world as being utterly ruthless, utterly amoral, immoral. And is that something you have to worry about when addressing this larger issue of what, again, President George W. Bush used to call winning the hearts and minds of the Arab world?
No, it's very important. I mean, some activities are designed to deal with people who are already convinced they want to kill you. But you always have to keep in mind the production rate of people who want to kill you in the future. And your actions to fight the close fight may actually affect and make worse the deep battle over a long period of time. But to get quite specific here, Fareed, when we talk about enhanced interrogation, we rarely, if ever, asked a detainee information we didn't already know the answer to while he was undergoing the enhanced interrogation. The idea here was not to get to truth. The idea here was to move him from a zone of defiance to a zone of cooperation. We held about 100 people. We found that we needed to do that to about a third of that 100. But once you got them into the zone of cooperation, this was a conversation that went back and forth, much as portrayed in the movie when the primary source, over a very decently prepared lunch, began to tell the interrogators much about what they needed to know in order to begin to track Osama bin Laden. Look, we didn't raise our hand and say, you know, we've had this plan for interrogation in our lower desk drawer here now for more than a decade. Thank God we've got a chance to do it. The agency was asked to do things in extreme circumstances. It did it out of duty, not out of enthusiasm, and I believe firmly that it made America safer because we did that.
But you're saying, Richard, that now is the time to dial back some of this.
Again, in each case, you've got to look at all your tools, you've got to look at the situation, and you've got to, at the end of it, it's not a legal question as much as it is a smart question. We want to do things, and we want to do them in ways that, on balance, make a very tough situation less tough. We're not going to eliminate terrorism. What we want to do is reduce it. We want to make ourselves less resilient. We want to persuade young men to make a different career choice, not to become terrorists in the first place. We've always got to ask ourselves, in what we're going to gain in some operation, whether it's a drone strike, whether it's an interrogation technique, is it worth worth it in the specific situation, and is it worth it in the large? I think, yeah, we dial it back a little bit, but we don't switch. We don't stop ourselves from doing things because we know, sure as anything, there's going to be future attacks. We're not going to succeed all the time. It's the law of numbers. There's too many terrorists out there. There's too many means in this global world of technological diffusion. We're too open as a society. There are going to be times they're going to succeed. We want to reduce the number of those times and the severity of if and when it happens.
We are going to have to leave it at that. Michael Hayden, Jane Harman, Reuel Marc Gerecht, and Richard Haass, thank you all very much.